Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Safey here with Anthony Broom. We are presented by Manscaped. So we thank our sponsors, Manscaped. As always, promo code 20GoBlue gets you 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. They got all your needs there. So spring ball's over, Anthony. Officially the offseason again in football. That was kind of a little break from the offseason, and it was fun. And the spring game was good, and we'll talk about that. Basketball also kind of in limbo as well. Brandon Johns Jr. Transfers, we'll talk about that at the end a little bit, where the roster's at, what we're thinking about some of the upcoming decisions. But let's start with the spring game. I mean, real quick, just kind of the overall impressions there. I mean, I thought it was a good game. It was a competitive game. It got a little boring at the end, but at the same time, we got to see a lot of the young talent in this game, and that excited me. The Mason Grahams of the world, the Derek Moores of the world, even those young offensive linemen that we saw. Darius Clemens had a nice game and a nice touchdown catch. So there was a lot to glean. We got to see Kalel Mullings play both sides of the ball at running back and linebacker. We got to see Mike Sainristil for the first time at defensive back, as well as in the slot on offense. So quite a bit that they showed without having to show scheme and tendency and things like that. But just in terms of watching guys, watching personnel, I thought it was fun, and I thought that we, had some, things to look for and a lot of interesting kind of storylines.
Yeah, it's one of the spring football to me it's college football's version of, to a lesser extent, the NFL preseason. I know these schools have these. In Michigan's case, you're going to play 3 non-conference games that are, let's call it what it is. They're 3 cupcake games this year, so it kind of serves as that too. But if you're going into spring football looking for, we know that Cade McNamara is good, we know that Blake Corum is good, Donovan Edwards are good, Eric All, the names go on and on. For me, spring football serves as what are the second and third levels of your football team? How are they developing? What do they look like? And as far as that goes, this was as competitive a Michigan spring game as I can remember. It did get a little bit boring later on, but that's when we saw Jim Harbaugh start changing rules and adding time to the clock and calling his own penalties. And sometimes you have to make it a little more fun for yourself and make it a little more competitive. But yeah, I walked out of that. I can't say that, there are questions we have about this football team that we won't know the answers to until September 3rd, September 4th, probably even longer than that, given that there are games to play and you build a body of work from there. But I feel strangely at ease with the depth. I know they're so young in so many areas, especially on defense, but I came out of that feeling like, I think they might be okay. We know, the elephant in the room, you lose 25 sacks off of your defense. You're not just going to you don't just go Mike Morris, Taylor Upshaw, we need you guys to go replace that production. It's not going to happen that way. That's going to come as a group effort through each level of your defense. And I'm not crazy about the linebacker depth, but other than that, I think they're young, athletic, and trending upward in a lot of other areas. So again, I don't think that spring ball or the spring game really changed a lot about how I see this football team. I think right now, I could pretty safely say I think this is a 10-ish win team. And then that's, you see what you can add to that from there. But it's a good team. It's a deep team in a lot of good areas, especially on offense. So if you can find a way to keep the ball rolling there and not just, you set a pretty good base for what you could be last year. Now it's your second season for a lot of those guys in prominent roles. You start peeling it back a little bit more. What can you do differently on offense? That's going to be the biggest storyline for me in fall camp, is how you further develop that identity while adding some new tweaks in there.
I think you put it really well, saying we know certain things about this team, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, to a similar extent, we know what Cade McNamara is, and I know that a lot of people have talked about the improvements he's made over this offseason. He didn't get a lot of snaps. He didn't have much time to throw on his 3 throws. His running game was just weirdly not on when he was on the field, which was kind of weird. And he had 4 punts in his 4 drives. He was lobbying to get back in the game. They didn't let him back in. His day was done. He still had 14 other practices to work, on things during. but it was kind of funny. We were up in the press box during the game, and a writer from another site, I honestly don't even know who it was, I just heard this, was writing takeaways from the game. And early on in the game, he goes, Blake Corum is, looks fast. That's one of it, was at least writing down for maybe notes or something like that. And I was just thinking, it's funny. Like, I mean, he looked fast. He looked pretty good. It's like, we knew that though. And,
sky is blue, water's wet, Pope is
right.
Catholic, right?
And then you start thinking about the things we do know about this football team, as you kind of mentioned. And I think that speaks to the floor of what this team is. You say 10 wins. I'd say a floor, even if things don't go great, is like at least 8 wins with the way the schedule is and all that. And I'm predicting much more than that. But that's a good feeling, I think, to have in the spring. Cade McNamara played 4 drives, punted 4 times. No one's panicking, except there'll probably be some people in the YouTube comments that are like, saying Davis Warren should jump him on the depth chart or whatever. By the way, shout out to him. A good spring game. But so, like, we know so much about this team without really having to see it in that game. And at the same time, I was fine. Well, I was complaining a little bit about them adding time in the fourth quarter because it was a little tiring. A guy would get a catch or make a tackle, and you're looking at your roster. Okay, who's number 34 or whatever? Half kidding there. But, we got to watch Derek Moore for the first time in a Michigan uniform. Mason Graham was really impressive on the defensive line too. And I came away impressed with some of the younger talent and unproven talent on both the defensive line and in the secondary. I thought Jalen Perry, who's not a young guy but hasn't played much in his career, looked really good at corner during some of his backup snaps. And he played a lot of the game. Same with Quentin Johnson at safety. Guys moving around like they could move around like that during a normal game. And that kind of encouraged me when you look at a couple of those spots. Linebacker's another one of them. Agree with you there that the depth is a concern. So you came out of it still with what we knew beforehand, but you feel pretty good about what we saw. Now, it's against, some backups at times. It's against half of your offensive line at other times when you talk about the defensive line and vice versa and so on and so on. But, I think there was a decent amount to glean about some of the second and third, guys on the depth chart, as you mentioned. Anything specific that you just feel a lot better about coming out of the spring than you did coming in? A lot has been made about the defense. I feel similar. I think I feel a little bit better than I did knowing that Mike Morris has stepped up, Taylor Upshaw has stepped up. Mozzie Smith in the middle is becoming even more of a big-time player there. Junior Colson said he feels sometimes like a veteran, even though he's still in his freshman year of college, which is crazy. But anything you feel a little bit better about? I'd say for me, it's just the defense as a whole, probably the defensive line. And it's just kind of an incremental, positive change for how I view it.
Well, it goes back to something we talked about a couple podcasts ago, where if you really sit down and think about it, and even go back to switching defenses from Don Brown to Mike McDonald, you sit here and you ask yourself during the offseason, like, do we have more questions about this year's defense than we did heading into last year? Now, obviously, we knew Aiden Hutchinson was good. We didn't know he'd wind up being, best player in the 2022 NFL draft good. But other than that, there were a lot of question marks there, and you weren't sure where guys, we didn't know where David Ojabo was going to come from. He comes out of nowhere, and he's, one of the 4 or 5 best pass rushers in the draft class. So there are a lot of unknowns still, and things that you just can't know until these are live reps, live bullets against other teams. I'll say this: a position group, like, I feel better about the defense in general, but more specifically, like we've been talking about, on the message board and on the podcast, about where do they look to fill some depth via the transfer portal. And I know there's some stuff with the kid from UCF at defensive tackle, but I don't necessarily know if they really need to dip into the portal for a defensive tackle. Like, one at this point would be, another body is always good. You like having guys out there because you're just an injury away from having to play someone that wasn't really in the plans. But, all of a sudden you look at Mozzie Smith, who could be the best overall player on the defense. I think Chris Jenkins and George Rooks, Rayshon Benny, all of those guys have taken steps. Mason Graham, I was very impressed by. Some have been concerned that maybe he's physically maxed out already, but he's 6'3", 292. So, if that's physically maxed out, that he physically fits the bill of what a college player at defensive tackle looks like. So all of a sudden, I think you can kind of go like 3, 4, 5 deep there. And again, I think the ultimate ceiling of that group probably comes with those guys you already have on the roster. So, if you can, at this stage in the game, if you can add someone in the portal, great. But if I'm adding someone in the portal at this point, it's probably more at linebacker. I don't think they need to add one at cornerback because Mike Sainristil has been a revelation there, and that was another big takeaway of mine. He was stride for stride. That one rep against Andrel Anthony made a nice play in coverage over the middle of the field. That looks like it works. And then all of a sudden you've got DJ Turner and Jamon Green, who had a good spring. Will Johnson, who I think is going to be too good to keep off the field. You look at these other areas, and all of a sudden it's like things might not be as. I don't think anyone ever thought that defense was in a dire spot, but when you lose the guys that they're losing, there's always going to be a natural drop off there, right? So I'm not. I feel more at ease. Maybe the floor is higher. We'll see what the ceiling winds up being. I will say this, like, I do think they have a chance to be a more well-rounded defense than they were last year. Those pass rushers covered up a lot of, I won't say warts, but maybe some where you're not quite as strong in other areas, namely on the back end of the defense, at cornerback with some of those other guys. But yeah, let's roll the balls out there, see what happens. And I think this spring was very productive for them.
I will say, going back to Cam Good, the transfer from UCF, who's in the portal, visited Sunday to Tuesday. I think that would be pretty big, but I agree with you that elsewhere, like we came into this offseason in January and people were saying, well, where do you want them to hit the portal at? And, I could name 5 positions. I think I did I wrote an article about it. I mean, defensive tackle, safety was one. I thought linebacker, and they already looked at guys at the running back spot to potentially add more of a bigger back, and we saw that they're trying to fill it now within the roster with Tavier Dunlap and Kalel Mullings. But now I'm with you in terms of the roster looks pretty good. I would take Cam Good, though, I think, at the defensive tackle spot. He's been productive for a few years at UCF, has played a lot of ball. He's a veteran. He would add a presence there. And, I don't think it would be like a Jordan Whitley situation where he comes in and plays 25 snaps the whole season or whatever it was. I think he could provide more than that. And as you said, kind of you're an injury away. And, let's say a guy like Chris Jenkins goes down there, then you're starting, Mason Graham or, Rayshon Benny. And then with the amount of rotation Mike Elston likes to do on the defensive line, going back to his days at Notre Dame, you're playing, a lot of these freshmen or, second-year guys quite a bit. So I think you could use a veteran presence there to go, pair with Mozzie Smith or even a guy to rotate in. And it seems like they feel good about Cam Good and what he can do. Notre Dame was a school he was considering taking a visit to. Potentially still is, but they just landed a defensive tackle out of the portal from Harvard. So maybe that, will change things in terms of, what his other options are. So that's something to monitor as well. But I think you feel pretty good there. And here we are going into the offseason. Jj McCarthy looks like he'll start throwing and potentially be full go in a couple weeks based on reports. So that is big as well because the quarterback thing is, man, Jim Harbaugh was answering questions about the quarterback battle at 12 or like 11:45 on New Year's Eve, whatever it was, at his post-game press conference.
It was going longer or before that.
Right. No, that's true. He started to get him late in the season. He had to talk about how it's a position that is leased and not owned or whatever. So that was like going to be the thing we were going to be talking about the most. Here we are. It was put on pause, but now that J.J. McCarthy's nearing a return after dealing with shoulder soreness during the spring, then things are going to heat up. At the same time, we're not going to get a spring game to see. We'll talk to guys during fall camp, and we'll get intel throughout the summer. But that is going to be really interesting now that in a couple weeks, it looks like, will be back open. The competition. Cade McNamara has gained on him this spring, obviously, with him being out and not throwing. But that's another thing to watch as well. I would say the odds that J.J. McCarthy takes over that job to start the season are significantly lower than I would have put them at a few months ago just because of that setback and the fact that, Cade has really emerged as even more of a leader and all of that. But we will see, and things can happen over the summer. Jim Harbaugh says the quarterback spot is, one of those positions where you can really improve by yourself. You can throw into a net. You can, get one other guy and run routes with them and, get some throws in. So it's a position where you can improve at throughout the summer. Any lasting thoughts on spring ball as we head into what'll be an interesting summer, man? I mean, the culture seems strong, and we saw the just about the whole team at the Pistons game the other night as well, which is pretty cool. We had no idea they were going to be there, and it seems like they were having fun together and all that. We saw a few of them in the concourse. You just have a good feeling about this team, I feel like, going into the summer, which is a complete 180, and some of it was perception, but a complete 180 from a year ago.
Yeah, I guess what I'll pick back up on the quarterback thing, especially if JJ is ready to throw here in the next couple weeks. Does Cade have a leg up? Absolutely. Like they always say the best ability you have is availability, and he's been the guy throughout spring camp. He played quarterback only a couple series for both teams in the spring game, and the leadership stuff is great. Like, you want to hear a guy's taking ownership, staking his claim, not going to cede ground there. But I'm really interested because we didn't see a ton of him in the spring game, really. I want to know where he got better in terms of, he said he was working on his footwork and, some accuracy things. I think we all kind of know at this point that if there ever comes a point where it all clicks for JJ McCarthy, whether it's this year, whether it's next year, whatever it is, it's going to be really hard to keep that guy off the field. And like, he already is, even if Cade starts, he's going to be on the field. So I think a lot of people have kind of called this quarterback battle already because JJ wasn't out there during the spring. I mean, everything that we've heard is that, look at, for example, spring game. He wanted to participate in that damn spring game so badly. He was holding for field goals and extra points. That's an intangible thing too. We talk a lot about how Cade McNamara has taken a step forward as a leader. That's another sign that a guy is scratching and clawing and doing everything he can to get on the field and make some sort of impact. He hasn't been throwing a ton, or he hasn't really thrown at all, but he's been doing footwork stuff in spring ball. Like, this battle is far from over. And if he's truly healthy when fall camp starts, to be a fly on the wall in that building, I think is going to be fascinating, because I think for a guy like that, and really, like, these two, they've been very good to each other and supportive of each other, but those two guys are as competitive as it gets. And if JJ McCarthy has this pent up kind of, I won't use the whole term here, but FU energy from not having participated in the spring, that battle is far from over. So I would just be, I know you're not saying this, we haven't said this, I would still think Cade McNamara is the favorite for the job, but do not rule out, I'm not ready to rule out that guy, because he has the combination of intangibles and skills. And like I said, if it clicks for him, it's going to be really darn tough to make that decision. And I don't envy them, but you also know that whoever comes out of this quarterback battle, we've said this going back to midway through last year, whoever comes out of it this year, it will be as earned as it ever has been. And I think that's exciting in terms of needing that quarterback to shoulder a little bit more this year. So
no, you're right. It's not over. The way I kind of view it is that, like, in fall camp, let's say JJ McCarthy is 100%. I expect him to be, whatever. He just doesn't have that kind of margin for error that he maybe would have had coming into the spring, where you can kind of, okay, a couple good days here, off day there. Cade's Mr. Consistent, right? I mean, I know he's got talent and, he has a good arm and all that as well. He's not just this consistent guy that, really isn't talented or whatever. But I think if JJ comes out guns blazing, has a great first week of camp, continues that, keeps it going, Cade plays well, but just doesn't maybe have the same tools as JJ, he can absolutely win the job. We could be sitting there 3 weeks in, guys talking about how this is really a battle. I don't think he would, Harbaugh or any of the coaches would really name a guy at that point. Probably either way. Go ahead.
I think you bring up an excellent point here, in that if it's close and it's just kind of like, JJ's been good, Cade's been consistent. If it's close, you go with the known commodity.
Because JJ will play either way. If you go with JJ, you could lose Cade, and Cade doesn't like. What would he bring off the bench?
JJ McCarthy is going to win this quarterback battle, which it's crazy that we're even striking this up coming off the spring. We didn't really play, but we're here. We've done it. Here we are. If he's going to win this battle, it's because he was head and shoulders the better guy. Like it's not a politics thing. It's not a promises thing. I think that's if it's neck and neck at all, go back to what Cade McNamara said earlier in the spring. I am a Big Ten championship winning quarterback. And that's if JJ is going to win this job, he clearly has to be better. And it can't just be, the YouTube highlight, people bringing up the YouTube highlights of garbage time touchdowns against, Western Michigan and Wisconsin. Like he has got to be what people think he is or what he think he can be. Like it's like this fall camp. If there's any debate on if there's any neck and neck to it, I think it will wind up being Cade, and I think that would be the right decision.
Yeah, and I'll say that I agree with you there. I will say that I think JJ could be a little bit better in the first 4 or 5 games of the year, and I could see them turning it over to him. I don't think it would have to be some huge difference between the two, but if they saw some sort of difference, I think we could see that going into the year. But I agree. If we're talking about the opener and who's going to start that, I think JJ would have to have an unbelievable fall camp, which I think he's capable of doing. And Cade would maybe be a little on and off here and there, and you just say to yourself, wow, we trust him. Because trust is a huge part of the quarterback spot as much as people, and that's why experience plays into it so much, as much as people kind of want to lament that and say like, oh, well, don't just go with the experience or the veteran. It's like, well, there's a reason why, because you got to trust the guy out there. And so it's going to be interesting. But yeah, we're in peak off-season talk already, talking about who's going to win. I mean, it's getting me fired up. I can't wait for the football season already. Should we shift over to basketball and talk about a little bit of the roster stuff? Or do you have anything else on football?
I have a lot I could talk about football, but
sure,
we have several months of time to fill here. So we'll move on to the next topic of the day.
For sure. Before we do that, let's talk about Manscaped. Fellas, have you started your spring cleaning yet? We got a new read, so bear with me here. The carpets need cleaning, the drapes need dusting, and your lawn needs mowing. Spring has sprung, and the global leaders in below-the-waist grooming have the best tools for cleaning aisle 5 in your pants. Time to clear out your winter bush and join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code 20GOBLUE. You get you 20% off and free shipping. That's 20GOBLUE at manscaped.com. Manscaped has the full package you need for spring cleaning this year. The Performance Package 4.0, which they sent us, a week ago, is the only tool you need to keep your boys looking and smelling like the fresh tulips your partner wants. Anthony, they sent us that package. They keep sending us great stuff, right?
They do. I have nothing but good and positive things to say. I mean, the body wash, the shampoo and conditioner, the hydrating body spray is outstanding as well. I mean, I've been with this company. This is, believe it or not, Clayton, 7 months now I've been with the company. Gotten a couple packages from Manscaped at this point, and they are batting 1,000. So I cannot recommend them enough for what they provide for us and what they provide to readers and listeners of the Wolverine.com's content.
Speaking of batting 1,000, man, you'll be at opening day tomorrow for the Tigers. I'm very jealous. Also, Masters is on right now. I'm kind of, a little distracted, trying to catch up on my guy Tiger Woods, watching him throughout the day. So pretty good sports week. Michigan in the Frozen Four. This is coming out as Michigan is playing in the Frozen Four, so hopefully they move on to the national title game. But some good sports this weekend for sure. And yeah, we appreciate our sponsors, Manscaped. But before we talk about what the Johns transfer means, and I think there's been some kind of misconceptions out there about that when it comes to scholarship numbers and everything. But I just wanted to quickly kind of ask you, because I was reflecting on this over the last day or so, and then it's even something I've kind of even thought about the whole season about Brandon Johns. But what do you see his quote unquote legacy, or I guess what do you take from his career at Michigan?
Legacy is complicated because I feel like when we talk expectations versus reality, what he will be remembered for is not living up to the hype, so to speak. Not that he was a potential one and done or NBA caliber guy, but this was a big get for Michigan in that he was a top, I think, top 40, top 50 guy that you pulled out of Tom Izzo's backyard. You pulled him right out of East Lansing, and Tom Izzo was pissed about that. Like, that's very well known that um, of what that whole situation was. And for whatever reason, it just, we would see glimpses of it. The last two seasons when Michigan needed someone to step up when Isaiah Livers was out. I mean, you could see like when he wasn't looking over his shoulder and he played free and loose. And that's not to say he always played. I actually think he was very underrated defensively. I thought that out there he brought good effort and energy, but there were times where he just, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's there was definitely a confidence issue there. He had been transparent about that. The coaching staff had been transparent about that. Um, I'm not. It's He was huge during the NCAA tournament last year. I mean, he was that Michigan team without Isaiah Livers, who is an NBA. We can say this right now, an NBA starter right now as we record this podcast. What Michigan lost with him cannot be overstated enough. And Brandon Johns played the best basketball of his career when the chips were down. But this year there was a clear path for him to, again, talk about how he'd not look over his shoulder. He started the year, I believe he started the year at the 4 or starting at the 4, and over time just kind of ceded the job and just never. He had that big game at Nebraska, but just never really put it together. I think that a change of scenery for him in a fifth year will do wonders for him. I think that if he goes to a mid-major program and has a chance to be a guy that's firmly in a starting lineup, I think he could be a good veteran ad for someone. But at Michigan, it was. I don't lay a ton of blame at his feet, but it's just, when you look at what could have been, he was the top player in the state of Michigan. There was some meat left on the bone there, and it's disappointing because there were times where we saw what he could be when it was all clicking.
For sure. It is very interesting. It's kind of a mixed bag when you look at his career. I will say, he was a freshman. He didn't play a lot. He played in 28 out of the 37 games, 4 minutes a game. He was kind of that reserve type. Like, look at Frankie Collins. He probably missed, didn't play in 6-7 games. Could have been more if, Devontae, who knows what it would have happened in the NCAA tournament. But similar to that, actually less minutes, though, than Frankie even. Then takes a pretty big jump. I mean, his sophomore season was his best year. When you look at stats, he averaged 6 and 4. He was a really good offensive rebounder. He added a spark off the bench. He kind of did what he was asked to do, was on a pretty good team, sat in the corner, took jump shots, crashed the boards, And I will say, then he kind of was the same thing the next year. Didn't actually play as much with a more talented roster. Shot the ball pretty well, but, and then did really well in the NCAA tournament, averaged 10 points, 4 rebounds. But I just feel like there wasn't a ton of development there. He kind of was the same guy physically as he was those years prior. And, that's pretty good when you're a stretch 4. You could, stretch the floor as a 5, shoot the ball. But if he would have really developed, I think it would have done wonders. And I think a lot of his career will always be looking back at, he had to play behind Isaiah Livers. And that's just really tough. Like, you're not going to win that job. I mean, not many guys are. As you said, Livers, I mean, we were at the game last night for the Pistons. He was in the starting lineup. And, so that's always going to be there, I think, for Brandon Johns. What could have been if he would have played 30 minutes a night for multiple years? I know he didn't deserve that with how he played in his limited time, but we saw him put some things together when he got on the floor a little bit more consistently. So that'll always be there for him. I do wish him well as well in his next stop.
Oh, excellent guy.
He's a great kid.
Beloved by his teammates, by the way.
And he bought in. It wasn't for a lack of effort, I don't think. Confidence was a thing he talked about as well. Part of me, though, was also thinking, what moves does he, have that that, even when confident, he can go to. He could post up a little bit here and there, got some shots blocked. He's a good shooter, so maybe if confidence played into it there. I still just feel like he could have, and maybe it would have come with playing time, but been developed a little bit better. But an interesting career, I think, for him. Now, when we talk about what this scholarship situation looks like, some people were saying, "Oh, perfect! Like now we can go get a guy in the portal, whatever." It's like he didn't have a scholarship necessarily. This was his fourth year. He played all 4 years. He only has the extra year because of COVID. Unlike Eli Brooks this year, next year, these guys that are using their extra years are going to count against the scholarship number. So he didn't necessarily get invited back, or even 2 years ago thought that he was going to have this opportunity. So you can't try to trash on him that way. I know a lot of people like to, he's kind of the punching bag type of guy. But the scholarships are still full here with 13. You have huge decisions coming up for Moussa Diabate, Hunter Dickinson, and to a lesser extent, Caleb Houston, who I think most people believe will return, feel pretty strongly about that. There was some talk that maybe they would want him back if Moussa left. You still might want a forward there. And it looks like that's going to have to be somebody in the portal. But I guess your thoughts on just kind of where the scholarships stand. It doesn't change a lot. I just wanted to kind of clear that up because we got so many people asking about, what they're going to do with that scholarship. There was no Brandon John scholarship. He was basically going to be a portal guy. Like if you had a room, you could maybe ask him to come back if he wanted to. But we're kind of still in a standstill here. April 24th is still the deadline for those guys to enter the draft. And even if they do, which you wouldn't blame them, and you probably expect at least one or two of them to enter the draft, go through the process, still until June 1, until they can withdraw. So there's still a ways to go here.
Yeah, it's important there was no spot for Brandon Johns. There is no spot for Brandon Johns right now. He went through senior night like his other peers did, and there was nowhere for him to go. So if he wanted to keep playing basketball, the portal was going to be where he had to seek that opportunity at. Now, maybe who knows, maybe Michigan loses a couple guys and his recruitment drags on a bit and he gets asked back. That happens sometimes. I don't know if that's necessarily the path forward. I think that's probably pretty unlikely here, but Michigan's 13 spots are filled up right now. And even it's going to be until I believe the deadline to declare and then return to school is June 1st. I think you just said. So
yep.
Even if these guys, let's just say Hunter, like let's say the three that we have in mind, Hunter, Caleb Houston, Moussa Diabate, let's say they declare, you probably are leaning towards at least maybe two of those guys being back, but you're not really going to know for a bit. I mean, there's a lot of off season to go here. So yeah, it's just one of those things where if they lose a guy, if they lose both Hunter and Moussa, you're going to have to go to the portal and get a big man. And then it becomes, if you have a shot at everyone else, is John's a guy that you ask back by default? I tend to believe, I think there's got to be close to 1,500 guys in the portal right now. So I think that, and Michigan has, they always keep a cursory eye on what's out there. There could be a guy, like I said, they're filled up right now, but they could have a couple of their own guys enter the portal. Like you just don't know until that name pops up, across the timeline. So-and-so's in the transfer portal. So right now, I mean, this team as constructed, I have questions about, but if this team as constructed returns, meaning you get Hunter back, you get Moussa and Caleb back, and those guys go through another summer of conditioning and skill training, things get interesting. It's where you lose one of those guys, two of those guys, where one, you'll have the spots to add other pieces, and two, it adds questions about the chemical mixture of what this thing could be. So, when I went through it earlier today, as we're recording this on Thursday afternoon, I did something for the website, so feel free to go check that out. What Michigan basketball's lineup might look like with its current roster. If everyone comes back, you've got your starting front court intact. You've got Caleb, you've got Moussa, you've got Hunter Dickinson, and those guys need to take steps forward. The freshmen do, that is, or they'll be sophomores. But you'd also have a backcourt of Frankie Collins and Kobe Buffkin that just hasn't played a ton of basketball, and Frankie is the most proven of the two. I think what we saw in the NCAA tournament is that guy can hold down the fort at the point in a pinch, but it's going to have to be more than in a pinch next year if he winds up being the guy. So there'd be questions there. I think that if you lose someone, adding an off-ball guard that can at least give you minutes, doesn't even need to be a starter, someone that can give you minutes would be probably the first thing I'd go after, because even with the bigs, you do have Terrace Reed coming in, and I think that he's going to be ready to play. So a lot to sort out, a lot of questions. It's almost a futile practice to even try and project what it might look like because of how fluid the transfer. People complain, oh, transfer portal is the era of free agency now. Guess what? We can't complain. No one's complaining because this is how it is now. So that's just the way we have to handle it off season here.
Definitely. And I'll say this about Frankie. I'm with you there. It's going to be more than what his role was at the end of this past season. Now that you're a guy that's at the top of the scouting report or on the scouting report as a starter and you don't really have a jump shot, at least not yet, that's going to be potentially a problem. So that's something to watch for sure when you look at the backcourt. But I'll say this about the Brandon Johns thing in my last point is that I think the hope for Michigan fans is that Brandon Johns potentially had the opportunity to come back, or maybe they said, hey, wait a little bit and we'll let you know. But maybe, being close to these guys, and he thought, Hunter Dickinson could be coming back and Moussa Diabate could be coming back, and there's not really a spot for him. So that's the hope. It's not that, oh, thank God his scholarship's gone, we can go get somebody else. I think because, again, there was no scholarship. But if you're going to hope something here and you're going to be happy about something, I think it's probably that there was a potential chance that he could come back, and he saw that maybe those other two guys are going to return. At the same time, June 1 is still a date that we're probably going to be monitoring, because I would think you'd want to test the waters and get the most information you can. You see Max Christie doing it at Michigan State. You've seen plenty of other guys declare around the country as well that will probably return. And this is just the way it goes. We had to wait for Hunter last year. He said he was torn at times as well. So even if you go into that process thinking, yeah, I'll probably come back, your decision may change at different points throughout it, and whatever final decision you make is the one that sticks on at 11:59 p.m. on June 1st. But it'll be really interesting. So that is kind of our show for today. Off season for both now after spring football, and now that we're a couple weeks removed from the last basketball game. So stick with us at thewolverine.com. We still got a lot of stuff coming. Chris Ballas had his depth charts for the offense and defense, so check those out at thewolverine.com. $1 gets you an entire year, so definitely worth it to sign up now before that deal ends. And again, we thank our sponsor, Manscaped. 20GoBlue is the promo code there, 20GOBLUE at manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping, and we'll see everyone next time.